When Ronnie was a 6-year-old boy upon the African Queen on a sunset cruise on the Zambezi River, he pointed to a crop-infested island and he says, "Mommy, Mommy, how do we know there's no gold treasure on that island? We should go explore." To which Mommy very hurriedly and worriedly replied, "Oh, no, 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 no. We don't do those dangerous and risky things. I'm sure some Zungu European explorers have already been there." It's not what my mom said. It was the interpretation that my mind made, the brain of a 6-year-old. I made an interpretation called "we don't do dangerous, we don't do risky, we don't do adventure." Leave that for those that do. Leave that for the foreign travelers, the adventurers, the explorers. Our job is to do what's safe, do what's secure, do what's certain. You see, that is the power of fear when in your mind it forms a limiting belief like a mental block. That mental block can stop you in your tracks. But it's there for a reason. It's part of our instinct. Instinct has been planted in all creatures to give you one of 4 F responses. What are these 4 F responses? We've all heard of them. When faced with fear, an instinctive response is to fight, to flight, to freeze, or to friend. But I want to talk to you about a different type of response. This is not an instinctive response. I want to talk to you about the 5th F. This 5th F is forward. Now, while instinct is planted in you to protect you, to save you, to bring you back to safety, the 5th F, forward, at first sounds and feels uncomfortable, but it's actually your opportunity to tap into and be guided by one of the powers latent in humankind that we've yet to develop. And this forward will have us tap into intuition. You see, intuition that you generate from fear can act like your guide in those hardest moments. Intuition, if you really listen to it, can be your guide or your guru. Guru? What's a guru? Guru comes from the Sanskrit words gu, which means ignorance, and ru, which means dispeller. So quite literally, guru means the dispeller of ignorance. And if fear is an illusion, it's also the dispeller of fear. So fear is your guide, fear is your guru. Now this thing that I'm talking about, tapping into and developing our intuition, is a very learnable skill. But it won't apply in all instances of danger. In some instances, we rightly need an instinctive response to protect us and keep us safe. But once you start to learn from your patterns of those things that confront you, that challenge you, I invite you to do a subconscious 3-question litmus test before you continue forward. And these 3 questions I ask myself before I know it's right for me to tap into my intuition or trust that my intuition will show itself up to guide me through the process as my guru, is I ask myself these 3 questions. Is the problem big enough? Is the solution, number 2, is the solution going to benefit humanity? And number 3, if I F up, what's the worst case scenario? Those are the 3 questions you should ask yourself before you move forward and invite your intuition to guide you. You see, this thing that I'm saying can be learned if we look back at our own life's setbacks, failures, and even our triumphs. You will know when you move forward, were you guided by intuition or did we move forward disregarding instinct and do so carelessly? When I was a 15-year-old and I was discovering this for the first time, I was met with fear. It all began where one day a group of friends called us saying that they'd been roughed up and beaten up, and they needed us to come and help them deal with these bullies. And so we hurriedly showed up to the venue. There was a showdown. I won't go down into detail, but let's just say that day ended with us looking as victors. Now that victory was very short-lived. The fear was yet to kick in, because 2 days later, we got picked up by the police. Yes, at 15 years old, I was locked up. And being arrested at 15 years old, the first thing that comes to mind, what's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to my education or my career? What about my reputation? What about my family? What would be the impact to my family? But actually holding on, buckling our seatbelts, and going forward through the process, acknowledging our mistakes, we learned a lot. We learned about the legal system. We learned about our rights as juveniles. We learned diplomacy and tact. And we even learned how to finally make friends with the enemy. That's what happened to me when I was 15. Fast forward 10 years when I'm 25 years old and I'm leaving the safety and comfort of my home, having grown up, studied, educated, and started my career in Kitwe, I get an opportunity to go to the UK. What does this guy coming from a third world country know about going to the first world? Of course, I was faced with fear again. Am I good enough? Am I competent? Am I smart enough? Will they understand my accents? All those things are forms of fear. Tapping into my intuition, again I was guided, and within 5 years, I made vice president in a very global international investment bank. That's the power of intuition as your guide, intuition as your guru. I had a great career there. It was a safe job, very high pay, it was a great title for a very great brand company. And in the middle of that comfort, I was again invited by my intuition to lead. How do I leave the safety of this job as vice president in a very successful looking career to leap into and start my own venture? I had become quite literally a fat banker. And I leapt into the health industry to become a fit banker. And going through that process, the first thought that came to mind is when I post my topless photos of fat me on social media, what will people think? How will I be judged? That is a form of fear kicking in that could stop us in our tracks. Again, I marched forward, and through that process now, we have coached and guided thousands of participants globally. We've taken over 100 people to the summit of Mount Kilimanjaro, and I myself have summited Mount Kilimanjaro 9 times. If I listened to instinct, I'd be still sat in that banker's chair. That's just one example. In the middle of lockdown, a few years later, my wife and I were expecting, we were pregnant, and in that moment, expecting our second born, while at home, dilly-dallying and delaying and procrastinating to rush at the hospital for water breaks. I've got no training, there's no midwife, there's no doctor there, the ambulance hasn't arrived, it's lockdown, and I was faced with fear. Will my baby survive? Will my wife survive? Will I lose both of them? Tapping intuition, I was guided to do this safe and healthy delivery. And we now have our healthy baby as a result of tapping into and leveraging our intuition. Now, these are multiple examples I'm sharing of where, when faced with fear, we can learn how to knock the door of intuition by moving forward. And you see, this thing that I'm talking about, whether it was leaving the safety of home, going to an unknown new land, or climbing a mountain 9 times, one of which I had COVID, or delivering a baby, dealing with life or death. In the middle of COVID, I was also called in to serve my guru who was on his deathbed. And of course, in the middle of COVID, you're told not to go to somebody that has COVID. Tapping into intuition, I was guided to really support him in his final moments. What I'm sharing with you is something we can all learn. It's not exclusive to me phenomenon. This is something that's latent in all humanity. But the first thing you have to acknowledge is that we have fear, and it is a creative force that we can learn how to harness and master. I'll give you an example here. How many of you procrastinate? Raise your hand. I can see some of you are still thinking about raising your hands. That's procrastination. See, procrastination is a form of fear too. What if I raise my hand? What is he going to ask next? What if I get this wrong? Procrastination, aka fear, is designed to keep us safe. Let me just keep my hands down and see what he does next. But this procrastination and fear as a creative force has been there and supported humanity through the years, through our evolution, and even cited in religious texts. Fear not is stated 365 times in the Bible. Ironically, as many days as there are in a year. In the Bhagavad Gita, a 700-verse Hindu scripture, it starts off by telling you the story of the royal prince Arjun going to battle, to war with his own cousins and uncles to protect his kingdom and his land. Do you not think he was faced with fear? He completely was. He was consumed by fear. He was paralyzed by fear, and he actually fell fell to the floor at the start of this war. He tapped into intuition. His guide, his coach, his guru, Lord Krishna, empowered him and inspired him to stand up, step up, and move forward and fight for what's right. I mean, what kind of a world would we have today if it wasn't for Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, and our very own Kenneth Kaunda? If they were consumed by fear, if they feared being arrested, if they feared being assassinated, if they feared being stopped in their tracks, we wouldn't have the world and the country that we have today. What did the three of them do? They all chose to march, and they marched which way? Forward. Talking of which, isn't our current president somebody in his political journey, during his campaigns, having failed 6 attempts at vying for presidency, got locked up 15 times? Was he not fearful of being stopped in his tracks? Was he not fearful of arrest? Was he not fearful of assassination? Was he not fearful of failing yet another election? Of course he was. But him having learned the system and learned to tap into his intuition, what did he do? He moved so forward that his mantra became forwardy. You see, that's the power of tapping into our intuition. Fear is such a powerful creative force. If we learn how to identify it, if we learn how to harness it, if we learn how to master it, we can make amazing things. I mean, think about all the amazing inventions that we have in this world today. They've all come out of tapping into intuition, which opened a certain level of creativity that allowed us to create a product or service to solve that thing which we fear. It's the fear of darkness that had us discover electricity and invent the light bulb. It's the fear of disease that led to many medical discoveries and innovations. It's the fear of ignorance as to why man places great emphasis on educational institutions. And it's the fear of war that led to the birth of the United Nations. You see, even in business, when everybody's heading this way, you should head that way. It's likely less competitive and therefore more profitable. So, that's what I invite you to do. When you are next faced with fear, imagine this. Imagine if you chose to march forward. If there is something that you truly want, if there's something that's big enough, if there's something that will benefit humanity, and if it's something that you can be with living with the worst case scenario, I invite you to move forward. Tap into your intuition. You may make mistakes. You may fail or trip along the way. You will learn from the mistakes. You will grow from the mistakes. You will transform yourself as you expand through the process, and you will get to transform the world around you. So in this new year, I'm going to invite you and leave you with quite a different wish. When you're faced with fear that comes between you and that big thing that you desire, don't fight, don't flight, don't freeze, and don't even friend the enemy. That thing that you're working on, that thing that came to mind when you hear me speak today, that thing that you fear doing, do it forward. Thank you.
Hey, hey.